Hi, everybody. Thanks very much. You're going to have to let me know if you can see the slides flicking along, because I can't see anything. Is that just flicked over? Yeah? Cool. Okay, great. Huge pleasure to be here. I wish I could say interrupt me with any questions, but I don't think that's allowed, right? We've got a bomb on, so I'm going to click through a quick little presentation and end with some little videos. So my name's Alex Haw. I run a company called ATMOS, which is a architecture, art, design company. Mostly we do buildings, but we met this wonderful woman called Imogen, who had actually, she was going out with a guy that had commissioned an architectural project for us. And we got chatting about our kind of mutual interests. It turns out that she's very into the organic in the same way that we are, as well as technology. She's, of course, got these incredible gloves that control sound. And so there's this huge crossover into my field of space, somehow, how space can create this spatial phenomenon called sound. Here she is in front of a clock, in front of the structure that we were going to do a project for, the Roundhouse, which is effectively some sort of clock. It's a 24-column space, this glorious old railway piece of architecture. And so it was over a year ago that we first started chatting about the Reverb Festival that just a week ago, I think, and we were tossing back and forth various ideas. It's this incredible building. It's an old turntable, so it's quite funny. It's it's like this music player itself. It used to move trains around rotationally, and we were talking about building a sort of very immersive sculptural stage that burst through the building. We were really sort of orgiastic in our kind of desire to create something very fluid and sensual. It had roots that were running through the building. There was stuff being sucked up the columns. It was all kind of very wet and sexual and kind of orgiastic. And there were these great flowering things like a kind of weeping willow over the top. And then there was this desire to make this stage, which was very mountainous, have some pods up in the air, sort of cosmic dust of music, which would then connect to your soul and sort of electrify you into a sort of state of ecstasy. But there wasn't really going to be the budget for that, so we were going to end up doing a tree of some sort. So we started designing stuff that was essentially like a column, but then connecting the performer who is there on this little micro space to that much larger space in the same way that a tree does, and sort of shelters them. I mean, there's a sort of slight kind of gift idea a little bit, this sort of embrace, this sort of slightly feminine side perhaps. Things that had prompted this, that she'd seen of our work that were kind of maybe similar, a project called Light Hive in the Architectural Association, where we were mapping everyone's movement in this whole building and turning it into light. We mapped every single light in the building, and we tracked people's movements and then transferred their movements into this light. So you wandered through this kind of ether of surveillance, these little micro nodules effectively representing a human, which is exactly what's going to happen in the Roundhouse. Other things we did, this huge table for the Olympics. Again, it's a sort of participatory thing, an 18-meter long monster made from the world map. So we created this dining space for 80 people to sit on a bench, dine off of the ocean contour in front of a mountain of the world. It's 2 meters tall, maybe the world's tallest table, I don't know. It's got all of the world's cities carved out of it, and all of that light is then bursting through. So again, this idea of people somehow making this experience, not just by sitting at the table, but by being illuminated by the kind of lighter population. And then sculptural stuff like buildings like this, where we're using computers to actually carve very sort of sculptural forms that are sort of driven by necessity for clients. And we've also been designing, bizarrely, trees. It's not like trees aren't good enough already, but we had trees that do different things. So this tree floats down the rivers and canals of the East End. It's a floating bit of parkland. It's got a bit of grass on it, and you can just go and hang out with your mates. You can strap a motor to two of these canoes and float and sort of enjoy a sort of bit of green as you're on the water. And then last summer in the City of London, we designed this little tree that actually moved between venues. It went to the Gherkin one night, and then the Paternoster Square another night. It's got leaves because, again, there's no budget, which are all made, they're in the shape of the boroughs of London, so that there's no wastage between the cut kind of thing. And there's real apples on this thing, and it's not just a tree, it's an actual thing that you can go up and inhabit. You can walk up it, there's stairs kind of hidden amongst the branches, and and it's trying to give you this space that generally in the city is a kind of sterile environment. No one's really doing anything. So here you have people kind of tentatively plucking the apple, saying, oh my God, am I allowed to eat it? And then finding their way up the tree, finding different ways of nestling inside it or kind of climbing up it, getting to the top and resting in the sunshine finally in amongst the burrows. At night it had this kind of electric xylem, so the sap between these plywood wood grains would actually pulse with light. So again, a sort of precedent for what we were about to talk about. So Arborial Lightning was a reaction to the Roundhouse, a kind of desire to create a space that unifies performers and audience, and that also exposes all of the stuff that you don't really look at in the building, this sort of extraordinary structure that's sort of generally hidden outside of the main dome. It sort of enwraps you in the main circle, and then it splits these branches backwards. Here's a sort of perspectival plan view, zooming in on the stage here with a series of roots that splay round, and there's a sort of taxonomy of interaction where some of the roots go through and greet you as you sort of enter into the building higher upwards. So this root is now growing up the main trunk. Just to the side of it, there's some branches which are splayed back. The higher up, there's a thing that follows the colonnade and greets the people on the first floor. 2 weeping willow lines drop down, and they're interaction points, and you could then trigger the tree from those points. And then stuff starts to wrap around the dome, and finally 2 strands then hit the oculus, the kind of space where light is, as if it was a tree sort of photo-seeking somehow. And all of this can pulse with various kinds of activity. It can be fiery or icy. It can be even influenced by Imogen's gloves themselves, which send out a little signal. So important letters sometimes arrive, and this one arrived and said we got some money. This had all been sort of waiting, and we thought it wasn't going to happen. And then at the end of June, we got that letter. So it was all a bit of a rush. And suddenly we had to make a piece of software that could actually make this thing work. So I was working with a guy called Adam Stark that's part of Imogen's team. He's an absolute genius. He wrote this piece of software called TreeJ. So effectively, we would take all kinds of inputs, and he's an expert sound analyst. He works at Queen Mary's. He's a musician, and he's been analyzing sound for a long time, and he's written this piece of software that will allow you to analyze it in various ways and turn volume, frequency, all kinds of attributes effectively into light. So here he is, and here are our lights. We had a very quick rush around to see who's got lights in town somewhere, who's got 1.5 kilometers of lights, which isn't really generally available in stock. So this is Philips stuff. And we're starting to put it into chains here, and there's a whole kind of logistical operation about how you create this, because what we've got is a very sculptural trunk that we're laying these pixels onto, and that means that every distance between every pixel is unique, bespoke, of course, fairly complicated. So it means that there is no existing track that you can suddenly use. It means that all of those people that are going to influence the final product are actually going to be massively, when I mean the performance, they're actually going to be integral in actually making the thing happen. And we're creating these enormous strands. I mean, 1.5 kilometers of stuff. You think of just how far that goes. They don't even fit inside the roundhouse when we lay them down. We were running around the back of the stalls. And all of that is mapping onto the stuff that I mentioned before, this CNC cut plywood stuff. We're making bespoke little rings and branches that will all clip onto the columns. Here we are in the car park at night, creating this little sort of semi-bit of trunk, this kind of enormous cage, which is going to then end up being clipped onto the roundhouse columns, which, by the way, are heritage and you're not allowed to structurally touch. So there are all kinds of sort of logistical issues there. So we're looking up the tree rings here, and these are the ribs that are then going to cover them over and then be laced with the LED lines. And again, of course, it's all of these people that are kind of making it absolutely possible. So we've got, I think, 4,800 pixels, which is very laborious in terms of physical efforts to put all these pieces together, but is an absolutely minute fraction of your smartphone. It's absolutely nothing. We've got a 25 pixel wide screen, which is effectively delaminating into space as you get up. Here's a tribute to all of the amazing people that made this happen, and little Adam beneath the mesh net as we look from below, the guy that powered this with the software. So one night we had an opening. We weren't finished. We had 3 nights to install this, and they were each about a week apart. It's the way you're working with a live venue. You can't keep installing. So we had little intervals of time. We install the trunk, and here's Imogen kind of amazed at the pixels playing them, Bloomberg opening, all of these various little pieces stranding or winding their way into the colonnade, and people quite tempted to sort of try and hug this kind of thing of light suddenly. You see a little close-up of some of the detail there of the strands. A day later, we're then finally bringing the branches in, which are coming around the colonnade and stretching. So really it's a sort of parasitic structure that's winding its way around the various rings of the building, being kind of very opportunistic about wherever it can cling to, a sort of vine of some sort. And then finally we had the opening, where people arrived, and we were quite surprised at how quiet it was. Normally I go to an opening and no one's looking at the art at all. You know, they all just want the booze and they want to chatter. And I was just thinking, well, it could just be on the background. And everyone just sat down and shut up, and it was really slightly surprising and slightly kind of worrying, because we were like, God, what are we going to do? We were meant to be doing a sort of open mic session, and that wasn't for an hour. So we started it early, and people got up on the stage, and they sort of generally captivated with their good or bad or whatever quality music, but actually stunning. A really incredible series of performers, each one of them triggering a series of different effects. Sometimes the tree would be up there hovering in the ether, sometimes it would be gushing from the ground like fire, sometimes it would be sort of spasming, and sometimes it would be creating these little rings. There's all kinds of effects that can run from left to right or split in the middle. A harp would delicately pluck its strings up at the top. This is a guy from the BBC that kind of started beatboxing. It's fucking hilarious. This guy started playing the flute and rousing everyone into sing-song together. This guy's an opera singer who was sort of doing a standoff with a tree. Everyone reacted differently. Everyone sort of took it on, and sort of, you know, some people run round onto the stage and suddenly embrace it. And so here's some pictures of Jonathan Perugia took. Here you see this sort of quite gothic black octopus-like beast, which then of course becomes activated by people into color. These little sneaky alien-like tentacles sneaking behind them. You see them sort of plucking people out occasionally. And that's the kind of point that you can activate this great tree from. So there's all kinds of different ways. It's effectively an instrument. It's a thing to be played with music and turning it into light. So people beneath it, people from great distance. There are all kinds of interaction points throughout the building. This is Imogen's final show. She was using it in various ways, and she was playing video that then synced to the projector screen next to it, kind of thing. And if you want to see it, well, it's currently in her barn. Come by, it's in Essex. So I'm just going to quickly flick. I haven't had a chance to compile any video, but I was going to quickly flick and just show some sample videos, which seem to have disappeared from the screen. 1 sec. There we go. Oops, sorry. So just showing a sample of the way that it kind of responds.
Little lipstick gonna come through her hair. She's
Gonna go to the next one.
We were told no photography.
This is me sneakily filming, talking to the security. I'm not allowed to be there. So what you're seeing here is sound rolling up as if it was going up a sound cylinder. You're seeing the traces of the past scrolling up and splitting. Occasionally, so sometimes it's quite smooth, sometimes it's incredibly electric. You know, that was one of the original plans. Is it was actually like lightning.
In a sense, but it would...
Sorry, I'm boring you all to death with all of this. There was a point where you could actually submit your wishes to a chair, and your wishes then got vocoded out, and these are all wishes that are spreading. This tree is sending these wishes into the ether, and they're disappearing slowly. Oops, sorry. And occasionally stuff would then be sent back down like leaves of autumn kind of thing. And then I think my final one. That's it. Thanks so much.